Before we move on to this mysterious case that took place during World War II, I ask you to like this video and click on the bell to learn about the release of new videos. I am just starting my way on YouTube, and this will help me a lot. Enjoy watching, my dear listeners. It's the end of summer 1943 in the Bryansk forests. Our reconnaissance group was sent deep into the swamps to determine the possibility of moving artillery to the flank of the fascists. There was a dry passage in the swamps, about 100 meters wide, and if you drag the guns through this corridor, you can hit the fascists from the flank. Tanks won't pass there. Firstly, the thicket is dense, and secondly, a tank is heavy. It's likely to get stuck in the swamp. Try to pull it out then. But light guns, if pulled by horses, would be just right. But the fascists also knew about this corridor and understood its importance. So they covered it well. They built a pillbox, dug trenches, stretched barbed wire in front of the trenches, everything as it should be. You can't take it by storm. And here we are, lying on our stomachs in the bushes, all camouflaged, studded with twigs like forest spirits. From 2 steps away, we can't be distinguished from the surrounding landscape, and in front of us within reach are German trenches. The trenches are shallow because the water is nearby. There's a swamp on the right and left. You can't bypass it, and it will be hard to break through. There are about 40 of them there, and behind the pillbox is a bunker. The commander whispers, studying the situation through his optics. Yeah, there are 3 machine guns and even a mortar. It will be very difficult to dig them out from here. I add to the information. I see a hut 100 meters to the right. Our sniper Tulev, who is lying next to me, reports in a barely audible voice. We peer into the thicket and indeed notice an old wooden log house between the ancient trunks. The building is barely distinguishable against the background of the forest, and only the sharp eye of Tulev could spot the moss-covered hut at such a distance. What's this shack? Semenov, go to this wreck and check if there's a sniper there or he'll shoot us all. And I beg you, do everything quietly, the commander orders without taking his eyes off the optics. I carefully crawl back and, hiding behind bushes and trees, slowly approach the hut. Sometimes it disappears from view behind the trunks of trees, but I clearly stick to the direction. I crawl about 100 meters, but the hut hasn't come closer. I move on. Another 100 meters. No result. What nonsense! I whisper in indignation. It's not a mirage, we all saw it. There it is, 100 meters away from me. I make small dashes and overcome another 200 meters, but the hut seems to be mocking me. It was 100 meters away from me and it hasn't come closer by a meter. Sitting under a tree, I stare at the hut and try to gather my thoughts. First, I pinched myself to check. Is it a dream? Then I started to quietly articulate the situation out loud. So, what do we have? There's a hut 100 meters away from me, and there's an order to inspect it for the presence of enemy forces. The order must be carried out. Petrovich won't understand if I report to him that the hut ran away from me. Damn it, it doesn't fit in my head. I moved away from the group almost half a kilometer, but I didn't catch up with the hut. Isn't it nonsense? Suddenly, I hear a woman's voice from the side of the swamp.
Help! Help!
I jumped up in surprise. Where did people, especially women, come from in this wilderness? Breaking through the thickets, I see a scene. A young girl got into a quagmire. She must have stumbled. It has already sucked her up to her chest, but she grabbed the root of a mighty oak with both hands and holds on with all her might. Naturally, I rush to help. Grabbing her by the hand, I pull her to the shore with all my might. And then something happens that made me go gray before my time. The girl grabs my hand with a steel grip, continues to hold onto the root with her other hand. Then, with incredible strength, she pulls me towards her. Her eyes turn a dark burgundy color. And in some growling voice, she says,
Listen here, soldier. I got into trouble. I've been in this state for 2 weeks now. It so happened that we had a disagreement with the owner of these swamps. We had a serious argument. In general, he grabbed me and is pulling me into the swamp. Nothing good awaits me there. Therefore, I don't know how, but you have to pull me out of his paws or I'll drag you with me. Got it?
While she was telling me all this, her appearance was changing, acquiring absolutely terrible features. Literally in a few seconds, she turned from a pretty girl into a real swamp monster. Her skin became greenish. Her eyes glowed with an eerie light, and her teeth turned into sharp fangs. Instead of a nose, there were 2 holes, and the mouth was like a talking hole. From the wooden head, 2 blood-red eyes were looking at me. I've seen a lot during the war, but here I must admit I was a bit stunned with fear. I tried to break free, but it was not to be. Her half-wooden, vine-like hand literally wrapped my wrist with its long fingers. Pulling out a knife, I hacked at it a couple of times, but in vain. Not even traces were left. And this creature started laughing as if mocking. "Who are you?" I blurted out.
I am the mistress of this forest. You call me by different names. Yaga, Leshy, Kikimora, Forest Spirit. All this is me.
Of course, I read fairy tales about Baba Yaga in my childhood, but to meet her like this, if someone had told me, I would have laughed at him. But here I see it with my own eyes. Maybe I'm still sleeping. No. My arm hurts from the pain. This terrible creature is holding me so tightly. Then I notice how the water around her is moving in waves and occasionally tentacles emerge as thick as my leg. Catching my gaze, the hag explained.
It holds tight. I can't break free myself.
After a couple of minutes assessing the situation, I made a decision. Taking out an anti-personnel grenade, I decided to bluff a bit and said, "Now you listen here. You have 2 options. Option number 1, I will now pull the pin out of the grenade with my teeth and throw it under the root you are holding onto. The explosion will tear the root apart. I will die, and you will be at the disposal of your swamp friend. And believe me, I have nothing to lose. For non-compliance with the order, I will be shot anyway. So if an hour earlier, an hour later, it doesn't matter. Option number 2, I throw the grenade behind your back right into the whirlpool. From the explosion under the water, hell will break loose for a couple of seconds. The tentacles will weaken and I will pull you out. But here we act on a mutually beneficial basis. I free you, and you help me deal with the Germans who have settled in the trenches not far from here. Which option do you choose?"
The second.
And let's have no deception. I must be sure that by morning there won't be a single living German left there. Though no, leave at least one, we were ordered to take a prisoner with us. I continued to press.
I'll do it.
Echoed from the hole in my head. "Well, God be with you," I pleaded and pulled out a pin.
Don't talk about it.
Hissed the hag. "It's all right, you'll pull through," I encouraged her, tossing the grenade into the swamp. As soon as the grenade splashed, I laid down on the ground, and a second-by-second countdown started in my head. After 4 seconds, the slush swelled and boiled. The bang was not loud. The water muffled the sound of the explosion. I jumped up and pulled the hag by the hand with all my might. With her other hand, she also apparently pulled the root towards herself. With our joint efforts, we pulled her out of the quagmire so that she flew out like a cork and, turning over in the air upside down, crashed back against the oak. The blow was so strong that leaves fell from the oak and a couple of crows relieved themselves off schedule. "Did you not hurt yourself, Granny?" I asked, approaching the tree. But instead of gratitude, this monster jumped to its feet and jumped onto a branch that grew 4 meters above the ground, and through the crowns of the trees towards the hut. It dashed so that I would not have caught up with it running. It will soon start to get dark. I started making my way to my group, and after 10 minutes I was in place. "What, did you crawl to Berlin?" Petrovich frowned. "Well, I ran into some tripwires there. Had neutralized them?" I lied. "Did you check the hut?" "Exactly. Everything is clean." Well, I couldn't report that the hut ran away from me, and then I met Baba Yaga. And what was the noise there? Well, one tripwire worked. Had to throw a grenade into the swamp. I continued to invent smoothly. "The Germans, look, also got worried. Now they're staring into all the binoculars," Petrovich complained. "And you still have to go for the tongue at night." "Don't worry, Petrovich. I'll get the tongue. It won't go anywhere." 50 meters to the right, I see movement. Tulev, the sharp-eyed, reported again. Everyone turned around and was stunned. A richly dressed German Frau was walking through the forest towards the trenches. She was picking flowers and humming a song in the language of Arnimia. Petrovich and I are old scouts. We are fluent in German. And when we saw and heard this, our jaws dropped to the ground. Fortunately, we were lying down. In the meantime, a carefree Frau with a bouquet of flowers approached the barbed wire and started shouting,
Günther! Günther! It's me, your mother. Günther, are you here? Guide me through this horrible wire.
Third Germans in the trenches, it seems, were just as stunned by the scene as we were. For about 10 minutes, they couldn't believe their eyes. They were wiping their binoculars, waving their hands, pointing at the Frau. The Frau, meanwhile, continued to call Günther. Finally, from the trenches came.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot! It's my mother!
A huge guy emerged from the trench and ran to the woman. "Semenov, is this your job?" A threatening voice sounded over my ear. "No way, Comrade Commander, I see this woman for the first time." I didn't lie this time. "You're lying, aren't you? You probably found her in the hut." "Honest to God, Petrovich, I've never seen her before." Meanwhile, Günther lifted the barbed wire, and the mother barely crawled under it.
Mom, how did you end up here?
Günther was surprised.
Oh, son. Our Führer has now allowed parents to visit their sons on the front. I was kindly provided with a place on the plane. I arrived a couple of hours ago and got a little lost in this forest.
The audibility in the thicket was excellent, and we caught every word. "What nonsense is she talking about? What plane? What Führer?" Petrovich whispered in astonishment. Apparently, Günther also couldn't believe his ears, but his eyes saw his mother, and this completely confused him. Gunnar hugged her and led her into the bunker. We continued to lie with our jaws dropped. What kind of parents' day did I just see, Semenov? The commander came to his senses. "We still have to take the tongue, and his mother arrived. What should we do now?" "Something tells me, Petrovich, that they will soon have a party there. Let's just watch for now." It was getting dark. The moon lazily came out for its night shift. The forest sounds began to subside. "There's some movement to the right and left of the Germans," Tulaev quietly reported. We looked closely. From both sides, a bluish, dimly glowing fog was approaching the German trenches. It gradually covered all their positions. After a couple of minutes, music began to come from the bunker. Then cheerful voices and laughter began to be heard. At first, the laughter was only male, but then women began to laugh. We heard many female voices. They squealed and laughed. The party was gaining momentum. Drunken screams and laughter, chorals singing throughout the forest. Where did so many women come from? We only saw one. Petrovich wondered. But no one could explain this fact. We just watched as events unfolded. The party reached its peak. The noise was such that all the swamp frogs hid. I already wanted to go for the tongue while the Germans were making noise and drinking, but then everything fell silent as if on command, just deafening silence. The whole forest froze. And after a couple of seconds, we heard a scream. It was just a heart-rending scream. I had never heard such a thing. It seemed that the forest itself was screaming from wild pain. It was a mystical minute. It chilled us all to the bone. Night forest, ancient trees, a huge moon. German trenches are shrouded in shimmering fog. And above all this, a soul-chilling scream. When everything fell silent, a figure of inhuman proportions emerged from the fog in the moonlight, 3 meters tall, arms to the ground, and as if skin shedding rags. Red, glowing eyes stared straight at us. We felt in our gut that it sees us. Some primal fear paralyzed everyone. We lay and were afraid to stir. At the same time, I clearly understood that everything was over in the trenches. Apparently, having brought this thought to me, the creature jumped up right into the crowns of the trees, and the branches began to rustle and sag, marking the rapid movement of the terrible creature into the thicket of the night forest. "What was that?" Petrovich wheezed. "Baba Yaga, or the forest witch, Tulaev replied. "How do you know?" My grandfather told me. He was a hunter and saw it himself. Everyone understood that something out of the ordinary had happened to the Germans. Therefore, there was no desire to go to them at night. The commander understood this and decided to wait until morning. With the dawn, the fog over the trenches dissipated, and we moved straight to him. A bloody trail stretched from the German positions to the place where the forest spirit jumped onto the tree. In the trenches themselves, there was an absolutely horrifying picture. The soldiers were torn to pieces, which were scattered everywhere. But the most terrible thing awaited us in the German bunker. In the middle of the bunker, severed heads were neatly piled into a pyramid. From the base of this pyramid, Rays of torn arms spread in all directions. Around this terrible daisy in absolute silence with a stool in his hands, Gunter, who had gone mad, was waltzing. His head was completely gray, and a blissful smile spread across his face. Everything as she promised, one remained. I muttered quietly with horror in my eyes. What? Petrovich wheezed. Yeah, no, nothing. Just trying to understand what happened here. We took Gunter with us. True, there was no use from him, but we couldn't leave him here. Let the authorities decide his fate. We blew up the bunker in the pillbox. After that, we went to ours. A couple of days later, artillery was thrown across the swamp, and in the first days of autumn, the Bryansk offensive operation began, as a result of which the city of Bryansk was liberated.